So prior to COVID, we had in excess of 350 research studies. And these studies are all looking at diseases and mechanisms of diseases and basically the science behind the disease, what happens, whatever the condition is, the science behind that, and how we can treat it and how we can manage it. So when the COVID-19 pandemic started, what we did was we looked at all our studies that we were doing and we decided which ones that we would continue and which ones that we might pause so we could concentrate on COVID work. We then also looked at all our staff and we looked at their skills and what they had so we could see exactly what resources we had in terms of staff. When I'm talking about staff, I'm not just talking about nurses, I'm talking about all the other staff that work within this unit. So we have a huge range of different careers in this unit and every single member of staff is as important as the other one. Then we looked at our facilities and we looked at what we could do with our facilities, whether we could change it, and what we actually ended up doing was changing some of our areas so that we could actually see COVID-19 positive patients and all the sort of precautions that need to be taken with that. Then once we started looking at COVID-19 studies, we actually did quite a lot of them. So we did quite a lot that were looking at diagnostics, we did quite a lot that were looking at how the path of COVID-19 carries on, how you can treat it, how you can look at who gets seriously ill, who doesn't get quite so ill. And in this way, what we did was we had staff that were going out into the COVID-19 red wards and actually recruiting patients to those studies. We also did a lot where we did some follow-up clinics with those patients, so we looked at the long-term effects of COVID-19. And then the other things that we have been a massive part of what we do is we looked at vaccine studies. So we've done lots of vaccine studies. We've recruited over 500 people to vaccine studies, and that's looking at whether the vaccine works, how it works, what time span between injections and things like that. So you probably don't need me to go on much longer, so what I'm going to do is pass you over to all the other people and you'll hear their individual stories of our staff. But I would like to say that I'm so proud of all our staff and what they've achieved during this time. I normally work on the ward as a clinical manager, looking after patients and volunteers taking part in research studies. But over the past year with the pandemic, I've been involved in coordinating some of the COVID research. Some of the research I was coordinating, I've been at home, so managing a team of nurses, volunteers and staff from the university, Addenbrooke's Hospital, and some of paediatric nurses, adult nurses, admin support, all striving to find an answer for COVID. I originally started working for the Cambridge Bioresource and we have so far recruited over 500 patients with COVID or suspected COVID, and we'll be following those patients up for the next year to find out how they've recovered, what treatments have worked really well, which ones have needed further treatment. It has been a challenging time over the past year, as you can imagine. My love is to look after children, so some of our children's studies have been put on hold during the pandemic, and as you see, I'm in one of the rooms. One other thing I've been doing while I've been working with COVID studies is knitting. So here's one of my friends. This is one of my friends, Megan, that I knitted for her with her mask. So she's been with her every day while she's at work as a little mascot, but I want to thank my entire team. I'd like to thank CUH, I'd like to thank the NIHR for all their support with my team and myself personally over this past year, and I'm looking forward in our battle to strive and find answers for COVID.
In a matter of weeks, back in April, May, we set up a large-scale trial. We had to organise a large group of staff, doctors, nurses, admin staff. We had to bring everyone together really quickly, get lots of training under their belts, lots of training for vaccine and for the trial protocols. And then in a matter of weeks, we managed to screen in excess of 600 people. And a couple of weeks later, we were able to vaccinate over 300 people. And then since then, we're now running a number of trials. So we're up to over 500 vaccines at this point. So it was a huge effort, and I'm really proud of my team because an awful lot of people had to come together really quite quickly. And you know, we've had paediatric nurses looking after adults and vice versa, and everyone's just kind of got together and done a really good job.
Like many researchers across the country, my research came to a pause during COVID to reduce the risk of transmission by bringing people onto the hospital site that didn't need to come in. It was very safe for my research participants, for my research to pause, so we did. Lots of other studies continue because they were therapeutic trials and there would be more risk to the patients if those studies stopped, but mine specifically paused. So I wanted to use my skills elsewhere across the hospital where they were needed. So in collaboration with Occupational Health, we set up a clinic to invite staff members to have their antibodies tested to whether they've been exposed to COVID-19. Whilst they were coming to clinic, we asked them whether they'd be happy to take part in Cambridge Bioresource, which 6,000 staff members said they were happy to do that. And what that meant is that we were able to answer some of the questions that were flying around the media, but also just to the general hospital leaders and managers as to which staff groups were at most risk. What was it about those staff members that meant they were most at risk? Was it their ethnicities? Was it where they worked? Was it both? So that information helped us to protect our staff in the future. So our staff members are risk assessed based on all of those criteria, and sometimes they might be asked to shield, or sometimes they might be offered a different deployment to keep them safe. And ultimately, if we can protect the staff, we can protect the patients as well. So that's the wonderful thing about performing COVID research, is that you get answers, and the Cambridge Bioresource is collecting data every single day to try and protect the public and staff against COVID-19. So that was my role, my main role during the first wave. I've also used my research skills to help with the COVID vaccine trials, and that was in the form of data entry, consenting to research trials, and also taking bloods before or after people having their vaccine. And it's been a wonderful opportunity for me to be working with the research nurses in a lovely team environment, and I couldn't have wished for a better environment to be working during COVID, which sounds kind of strange when you think about working in a hospital. It was really difficult, but with the people around you make it so much easier.
Hi everyone, my name is Chiro. I'm one of the research nurses working in the COVID-19 research outreach team. In fact, let me introduce you to the rest of the team and explain to you what we do.
Hello, my name is Giovanni, and one of the platforms we work on is the NIHR Bioresource. Its aim is to increase our understanding of COVID-19 and to help developing new prognostic and diagnostic tests or even vaccines. We've managed to recruit over 500 participants since the beginning of the pandemic, and we would love to invite even more.
My name is Areti, and apart from Bioresource, we support clinical trials like Recovery and Tactic that aim to identify more therapeutic options for people hospitalized with COVID-19. Once treatment efficacy is proven, these drugs become available to all patients. Up until now, more than 37,000 patients have been enrolled to Recovery, and we cannot thank enough our volunteers for contributing to that.
I'm Jason, and apart from continuously supporting the non-stop studies, we've been directly involved in frontline operations for COVID-19 clinical research studies and trials like the National Vaccination Program. Any COVID vaccines go through all the clinical trials and safety checks like all other licensed medications. We intervene during the induction phase and symptomatic visits to analyze their blood tests and assess the side effects to make sure that we capture everything.
Hi, I'm Joanne. Research is creating new knowledge that equips us all with results for the good of society. None of the vital COVID-19 research taking place here would be possible without volunteers willing to take part. Together, we can all make a difference and improve our lives.
During the pandemic last year, I was asked to form a little team, and we were tasked to do a point-of-care COVID test validation. So basically, this is the Samba machine. That trial was led by Professor Ravi Gupta. He is our clinical microbiologist here in Adam Brooks. We were based in N2. We have 4 Samba machines in there. So the testing were done using the swab that were taken from the patient that were recruited, and the machine will able to process a sample within 90 minutes. So thereby it facilitates a quicker clinical triage for those patients to turn up in ED and in N2. Then the doctors is able to allocate them to which ward they need to be admitted. So by first week of May, those machines were handed over and taken over by the point of care team. Since then, it has been used across the trust. So that initial support that we gave to the COVID-19 trials opened up another COVID trial platforms that the CRF is supporting, like the Tactic R, Tactic E, Recovery, and we also do the COVID-19 bioresource.
In our facility during the pandemic, we had to carry on facilitating a few trials. Those trials were called Never Stop trial because they were still benefiting the patient. This was important for them to still receiving care as well as being part of a research project. We had to follow safety guidance to keep our patients safe. They were coming quite regularly to the hospital, so we need to make sure while they were staying with us, we were wearing the right PPE, we were keeping the right distances between us, between them. We were checking their symptoms regularly to make sure they were protecting themselves, but we needed all to protect each other. Even though we had to stop a few trials, we carried on working on around 80 trials. So that was still quite an amount, while facilitating a COVID trial, vaccine trial, all new trials that were new to us and new to the world, basically.
In April 2020, when the pandemic hit, my usual work came to a halt and COVID became the new priority. So for 4 months I worked here, and this is the Adam Brooks Hospital Staff Testing Pod. We would usually have around 200 staff and their family members to swab each day. And we were really lucky to have a testing pod for staff set up so early on in the pandemic. If we could test someone who was suspected of having COVID and get a negative test result, they could get back to work to help fight the pandemic with their colleagues a lot sooner than the 2 weeks isolation period that the government had set at the time. And if they tested positive, we could then make sure that they stayed at home and weren't continuing to spread the virus to other hospital staff and potentially vulnerable hospital patients too. We could also then test the immediate team around them and try and catch any outbreaks before the spread could happen any further. We were effectively doing our own version of the track and trace system right from the word go. It was really important to identify staff members who didn't have any symptoms too, but tested positive. So we regularly swabbed staff members working in high-risk areas to make sure they were safe. And about 3% of people came back with a positive test result without having any symptoms. So you can imagine in a hospital where there's over 10,000 staff members, if 3% of those are spreading the virus without knowing, then it's potentially really dangerous. The testing programme is now huge, and every staff member is encouraged to get swabbed weekly, which is great. Since leaving the pod, I've been involved in quite a bit of COVID research back on the CRF. I've learned to take blood samples, and I've done that on a couple of different vaccine trials we're running here. I was part of a team that recruited 6,000 staff members to a Cambridge bioresource research study that led to us learning a lot more about COVID antibodies. And I've been seeing patients in a COVID follow-up clinic. So these are patients that were hospitalised with COVID to see if we can learn a little bit more about the long-term effects of COVID. It's been a roller coaster of a year. I've met some amazing people and worked with some people that I would never have even met before. And I feel really proud to have played even a small part in such a big team that has been so proactive in the fight against COVID.
At the beginning of the pandemic, I was taken off to a car park to work in a porter cabin where we did swabs on symptomatic staff and their families. I was then called back to the CRF to be part of the Oxford vaccine trial, which I really enjoyed doing, luckily, because then I've continued to do vaccines since then, working on Janssen vaccine and also distributing Pfizer vaccine to the healthcare workers in Addenbrooke's. And I've spent the majority of the last year dressed like this.
In spring 2020, when the pandemic first hit, many outpatient clinics were forced to shut so that staff and intensive care hospital beds were made available for COVID-19 patients. The NIHR Cambridge Clinical Research Facility has skilled staff and modern endoscopy facilities, and because of the air exchange in our endoscopy suite, we could help the hospital to continue to perform procedures on patients in a way that was safe for both them and us. So between March and June, we performed 178 endoscopy procedures on hospital patients that otherwise would have likely been waiting for many months. It has been an intense and challenging year. We have needed patience and dedication, but it has also been extremely fulfilling.